Ma'am, we can't work on that car. The parts alone would cost more than it's worth, and you probably can't afford our labor rates anyway. Maybe try one of those budget places down the street. The words cut through the busy afternoon atmosphere of the Pep Boys Auto Service Center on South Decatur Boulevard in Las Vegas, Nevada, loud enough to make several other customers waiting in the service area look up from their phones and magazines. Derek Patterson, 28 years old and 11 months into his position as service advisor at the automotive chain store, stood behind the customer service counter with his arms crossed and an expression that mixed impatience with the particular condescension of someone who believed they could judge a customer's financial situation by their appearance. Before him stood an elderly woman who had just brought in a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray with what she described as carburetor issues affecting idle quality, and whose modest appearance had led Derek to make assumptions about her ability to pay for quality automotive work. The woman was Dorothy Chen, 79 years old, standing at 5 feet 2 inches with the slight build that comes from a lifetime of physical work and advancing age. She wore simple clothes that looked like they'd been purchased from discount retailers rather than boutiques, a plain cotton blouse that had been washed so many times it had lost its original brightness, comfortable stretch pants in a basic neutral color, worn athletic shoes that provided support for feet that had logged decades of standing in workshops, and a faded denim jacket with oil stains on the sleeves that suggested hands-on mechanical work. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face showed the deep lines that come from 79 years of life, including 56 years of working on automobiles in an industry that had been almost exclusively male for most of her career. Her hands, though showing the slight tremor common to advanced age, bore the permanent stains and calluses that come from a lifetime of working with engines, transmissions, and the 1,000 components that make up classic automobiles. To Derek's eye, Dorothy looked exactly like someone who had bought an old Corvette without understanding the cost and complexity of maintaining a classic car, someone who would balk at legitimate repair estimates and complain about prices rather than simply paying what the work was worth. He had seen the battered appearance of the Corvette when she pulled into the service bay. The paint was faded and showing surface rust in several areas, the interior appeared worn and dated, and the overall condition suggested a vehicle that had been neglected for decades rather than properly maintained. Derek assumed she had inherited the car or bought it cheaply and now faced the reality that classic car ownership required financial resources she didn't possess. "Ma'am, that 1967 Corvette needs significant work. I'm looking at probably $1,500 minimum just for carburetor rebuild, fuel system cleaning, and basic tuning. That's if we don't find other issues once we start working on it. And honestly, based on the condition of that car, you're probably looking at $10,000 or more in work to make it reliable. I don't think that's something you're prepared to invest in." The dismissal was delivered with theatrical authority, playing to an audience of other service advisors and mechanics who had gathered near the counter. One of them, a young technician named Brandon who had been working at the shop for 6 months, added his own commentary. "Yeah, those C2 Corvettes are money pits. The Rochester fuel injection system on some of them is super complicated and expensive to rebuild. Even if we could work on it, you'd be better off selling it to a collector and buying something more practical. Maybe a nice used Toyota or Honda that won't need constant expensive repairs." Before Dorothy could respond with what would likely have been a patient explanation of why she had brought her Corvette to this particular facility, a voice called out from the shop manager's office with sharp authority that immediately changed the atmosphere in the service area. "Derek, Brandon, get to my office right now. Both of you. Immediately." The speaker was Michael Torres, 54 years old, the facility manager who had worked in automotive service for 32 years and who had just looked up from his computer to see Derek refusing service to a customer whose name had triggered immediate recognition. Torres had been reviewing the day's appointment schedule when he saw Dorothy Chen, 1967 Corvette C2, listed for a 2 p.m. slot, and he had specifically noted it because Dorothy Chen was a legendary figure in the Las Vegas classic car community. He had been working at his desk when he heard Derek's dismissive comments through his open office door, and he immediately recognized that his service advisor had just made a catastrophic error that needed to be corrected before it caused serious damage to the shop's reputation in the collector car community. Torres was not someone whose orders were questioned or delayed, and Derek's confident expression finally cracked as he realized his supervisor had witnessed the entire interaction and sounded profoundly displeased. Derek and Brandon walked toward the office with diminishing swagger, aware that every customer and employee in the service area was now watching them and sensing that perhaps they had badly misjudged the situation. Torres waited until both young men were inside his office before speaking, his voice carrying the controlled intensity of a manager who was containing genuine anger through sheer force of professional discipline. "Do you have any idea who you just refused service to?" Derek shifted defensively. "Sir, she's an elderly customer with a neglected classic car who clearly doesn't have the resources to properly maintain it. I was trying to save us from dealing with a non-paying customer who would." "That woman," Torres interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade, "is Dorothy Chen. She's been building, restoring, and racing classic Corvettes since 1968. She owns Chen Classics, which is one of the most respected classic Corvette restoration shops in the Southwest. She's restored over 300 Corvettes over the past 56 years, including multiple vehicles that have won Best of Show at Pebble Beach and other major concours events. She's forgotten more about Corvettes than everyone in this building combined will ever learn." Torres pulled up his computer and quickly navigated to several automotive websites, turning the screen so Derek and Brandon could see. The first site was Chen Classics' business page, showing a professional facility with multiple classic Corvettes in various stages of restoration, with Dorothy prominently featured as the owner and master builder. The second site was a classic car auction record showing a 1967 Corvette restored by Chen Classics that had sold for $275,000 at a Barrett-Jackson auction. The third site was an automotive magazine article titled, "The First Lady of Corvette Restoration, Dorothy Chen's 56-Year Legacy," with multiple photos showing Dorothy's award-winning builds and her workshop. Dorothy Chen, Torres continued, his voice growing harder with each sentence, started working on Corvettes in 1968 when she was 23 years old. At that time, there were almost no women in automotive restoration, and she faced discrimination and dismissal from people who judged her by her gender rather than her skills. She persisted anyway, learned from master mechanics, developed her own techniques, and built a reputation for producing some of the finest Corvette restorations in the country. That neglected C2 Corvette you dismissed is actually a numbers-matching 427/435 horsepower L71 big block Stingray that Dorothy personally restored from a basket case 15 years ago. It's worth approximately $250,000 in current market conditions." Derek's face had transitioned from defensive to pale as the magnitude of his error became clear. He looked at the computer screen showing Dorothy's impressive facility and award-winning restoration work, trying to reconcile his image of her as a broke old lady with the reality of a legendary master builder whose work commanded $250,000 prices. Brandon stood quietly beside him, no longer offering commentary, having realized he had added his own ignorant observations to what was becoming a career-threatening mistake. Torres wasn't finished with his education. The reason Dorothy brought her Corvette here to a chain automotive store instead of working on it herself at her own professional facility is because she makes it a point to support local businesses and give opportunities to shops that might not normally see high-end classic cars. She's been doing that for decades as a way of building relationships in the broader automotive community and supporting shops that are trying to expand their classic car service capabilities. She specifically chose this location because I reached out to her last month and asked if she would consider giving us an opportunity to work on classic vehicles so we could build our technicians' skills and reputation in that market. He pulled up an email chain showing his previous correspondence with Dorothy. She agreed to bring in one of her personal vehicles for a simple service job, carburetor adjustment, nothing complex, as a test case to see if we could handle classic car work with the professionalism and expertise that collectors expect. This was an opportunity for us to prove ourselves to someone whose recommendation in the Las Vegas classic car community could bring us thousands of dollars in future business. Instead, you judged her by her appearance, assumed she was poor and ignorant, and refused her service with public condescension that was witnessed by multiple other customers. Torres pulled up the shop's customer database showing notes from his previous interactions with Dorothy. "The budget place down the street, you suggested she try. That's actually one of her competitor restoration shops." You literally just sent a potential customer and someone who could have been a valuable partner directly to our competition while insulting her in the process. Beyond the immediate lost business, you've potentially damaged our reputation with every classic car owner she talks to, which in her case is most of the serious collectors in Nevada. He turned to address both Derek and Brandon directly. Let me explain something about customer service and the automotive industry. You never judge a customer's ability to pay by their appearance. The wealthiest collectors and most knowledgeable car enthusiasts often dress like they work in their garages, because they do work in their garages. They don't need to prove anything to anyone, so they wear comfortable work clothes and drive vehicles that they're not afraid to actually use. Dorothy Chen could buy and sell this entire facility with cash and not notice the expense, but she dresses for comfort and functionality rather than to impress service advisors at chain automotive stores. Torres gestured toward the service bay where Dorothy's Corvette was visible. That neglected car with faded paint and worn interior. That's a deliberate choice. Dorothy drives her classics regularly rather than keeping them as trailer queens that only come out for shows. The weathered appearance is from actual use and enjoyment rather than neglect. She could make it show car perfect anytime she wanted, but she prefers to have a driver quality restoration that she can actually enjoy without worrying about every rock chip and parking lot door ding. That philosophy is actually respected in the serious collector community as proper appreciation of automotive heritage rather than just investment speculation. The weight of Torres's words hung heavy in the small office. Derek managed to find his voice, though it came out considerably less confident than before. Sir, I didn't know who she was. She looked like someone who couldn't afford proper service, and the car looked neglected. I thought I was preventing a situation where we do work and then have problems collecting payment. I was just trying to protect the shop's interests. You are making assumptions based on prejudice and ignorance, Torres corrected sharply, and instead of treating every customer with respect and giving them the benefit of the doubt, you jumped immediately to judgment and dismissal. You embarrassed a legendary professional who has contributed more to the automotive community than you can possibly comprehend, all because she didn't look wealthy enough to meet your personal standards. That's not just bad customer service, it's discrimination that could expose this facility to serious legal and reputation consequences. Torres stood up and gestured toward the door. You're both going to go out there and personally apologize to Mrs. Chen. Derek, you're going to offer her complimentary service on her Corvette and personally assist the technician who works on it so you can learn what actual expertise looks like. Brandon, you're going to research Chen Classics and write a detailed report on her career and contributions to the Corvette community so you understand the magnitude of your error. This is going to be a learning experience for both of you, and for every other employee in this facility who thinks they can judge customers by appearance. They returned to the service area to find Dorothy standing patiently beside her Corvette, having used the time to examine other vehicles in the service bays and make mental notes about the shop's capabilities and organization. Several other customers had approached her after overhearing the initial confrontation, and she had been graciously answering their questions about classic car ownership and restoration. One elderly gentleman had recognized her from a car show and was enthusiastically describing how much he admired her work. Derek approached Dorothy with genuine embarrassment visible on his face. Mrs. Chen, ma'am, I owe you a profound apology. I was completely wrong. I judged you by your appearance without knowing anything about you or your expertise. I refused you service based on assumptions about your financial situation and knowledge, and I did it in a way that was disrespectful and unprofessional. I'm truly sorry. Dorothy looked at Derek with eyes that had seen similar dismissals and discrimination countless times over 5 decades in a male-dominated industry. Young man, you made an error that many people have made throughout my career. You saw an elderly woman in work clothes and assumed incompetence and poverty. What you should have seen was someone whose appearance reflected practical priorities rather than social expectations. I dress for working in my shop, not for impressing service advisors. My Corvette looks weathered because I drive it regularly and enjoy it rather than keeping it pristine as an investment. These are choices, not signs of inability to afford proper care. She gestured to her car with obvious affection. This particular Corvette was a rusted basket case when I bought it in 2009. I spent 3 years restoring it to mechanical perfection while keeping the exterior weathered and authentic looking because I prefer driver quality classics to show cars. The engine is blueprint and produces more power than factory specs. The suspension has been upgraded with modern components while maintaining stock appearance. Every system has been gone through and optimized. It's worth $250,000, but more importantly, it's a joy to drive and represents 3 years of my craftsmanship. She softened slightly. I've been dismissed by mechanics and service advisors more times than I can count over 56 years. When I started in this business in 1968, most shops wouldn't even let women in the service bays. I had to prove myself repeatedly, learn from whoever would teach me, and persist despite constant dismissal and condescension. What's important is that you learn from this experience. Don't judge customers by their appearance. Don't assume that elderly people or women lack knowledge or resources. And always treat people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Michael Torres added his own perspective. Mrs. Chen, thank you for your patience and grace. We would be honored to service your Corvette today at no charge, and I personally guarantee our best technician will handle it with the care and expertise it deserves. I hope you'll give us another opportunity in the future despite how badly we handled this initial encounter. Over the following weeks, Derek underwent a significant shift in perspective. Torres required him to visit Chen Classics and observe Dorothy's operation, where he saw the level of expertise, professionalism, and attention to detail that characterized her work. He watched as she diagnosed complex carburetor issues by sound and feel that diagnostic equipment couldn't detect. He observed her working with collectors who valued her knowledge and craftsmanship regardless of her age or gender. He learned that the automotive industry's best professionals often looked nothing like the stereotypical image of wealthy collectors in expensive clothes driving pristine show cars. The story of what happened spread through the Las Vegas automotive community. Dorothy's gracious response to the initial dismissal became an example of professional dignity, while Derek's error became a teaching point about the importance of respecting all customers regardless of appearance. Several other classic car owners specifically brought their vehicles to Torres's facility afterward, mentioning that they had heard about Dorothy's experience and wanted to support a shop that was willing to learn from its mistakes and treat experts with respect. 6 months later, when Dorothy brought in another of her personal Corvettes for service, Derek handled her appointment with professional respect and genuine interest in learning from her expertise. He had developed a new appreciation for classic cars and the people who dedicated their lives to preserving automotive heritage. And Dorothy Chen, though briefly dismissed as a broke old lady, continued her work restoring classic Corvettes with the same dedication and skill that had defined her 56-year career, proving once again that true expertise and value have nothing to do with appearance or meeting superficial social expectations. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments about a time when you learned not to judge people by their appearance or age. Subscribe to Hidden Legends for more stories proving that mastery and success often come in humble, unexpected packages.